CNN wanted to gauge how women in Florida feel about the sexual misconduct allegations against Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. So they put together a panel in Florida of Republican women, and this is how that went.
A show of hands, how many of you believe Judge Kavanaugh when he says this didn't happen?
I believe him.
I do believe him.
I believe him.
How can we believe the word of a woman or something that happened 36 years ago when this guy has an impeccable reputation? There was nobody that has spoken ill will about him. Everyone that speaks about him, this guy's an altar boy, a scout. He's, because one woman made an allegation. Sorry, I don't buy it.
But in the grand scheme of things, my goodness, there was no intercourse. There was maybe a touch.
Right.
Can we really? 36 years later, she's still stuck on that? Had it happened?
I mean, we're talking about a 15-year-old girl, which I respect. I'm a woman, I respect. And we're talking about a 17-year-old boy in high school with testosterone running high. Tell me what boy hasn't done this in high school. Please, I would like to know.
Why would she come forward if this wasn't true? Because it has basically destroyed her family. She's had to move, she's gone undercover, she's gotten death threats. So if she's lying, why come forward?
She's also destroying his life, his wife's lives, his children's lives, his career. I mean, why didn't she come out sooner if she's telling the truth?
Why didn't she come out when he was going into the Bush White House? Why didn't she come out when he's been a federal judge for over a decade?
Why not have a thorough investigation instead of just the two of them, he said, she said?
Because it doesn't matter. It does not matter what everyone else has to say.
This is what happened, though, with Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill. The FBI investigated. It took 3 days. Done. Why not now?
Well, this is not the same. This is a high school kid. I mean, it's not Anita Hill story.
So this wasn't your average group of Republican women. So we'll get to what's wrong with this panel and what CNN wasn't telling you about this panel and why it was incredibly misleading in a moment. But first of all, I've got to touch on the comments here. The sheer level of stupidity I saw almost made my head explode because that one woman said, oh, well, he was a 17-year-old boy.
Tell me what boy hasn't done this in high school. Please, I would like to know.
What are you saying? Do you even hear yourself? I take it most 17-year-old boys have not tried to rape girls? I mean, who thinks like this? What type of fucked up person, how skewed does your worldview have to be to think that this is normal behavior? It's not normal behavior. And you shouldn't accept it as normal, even if that were in fact the case. So, getting past the stupidity, what was it about this panel that CNN did not bother telling you? Well, as author James Surowiecki points out on Twitter, CNN's framing of this segment was really irresponsible. This purported to be a focus group that would show what Republican women think of Kavanaugh now, so each woman is identified as a Republican voter. But in fact, the two women who dominated the discussion are not average voters. They're better described as GOP political operatives. The woman in the white sweater, Lourdes Castillo de la Peña, has served on the Republican National Senatorial Committee and hosted a $1,000 per plate fundraiser for Ted Cruz's presidential campaign at her home. Gina Sosa, who made the now infamous comment about how all 17-year-old boys have done something like this, was a congressional candidate in the GOP primary this year. Angela Vasquez is a community council member in Kendall in Dade County. In other words, these were not GOP voters plucked off the street. They were in large part members of the GOP establishment in Miami-Dade. It's also odd to assemble a panel of largely Latina women in which all of the women are Cuban Americans who are far more conservative and more supportive of Trump than Latinx voters generally and than Latinx Republicans specifically. In effect, the focus group was stacked to produce the result it got: lockstep support for Trump's nominee and unswerving fealty to the conservative line. What's surprising about that segment is not that those women said what they said. They were, in effect, handpicked to offer that line. What's surprising is that CNN thought this was a good way to show what average GOP women voters think. So the fact that they didn't disclose this is troubling. The fact that they framed this as a panel of Republican women is troubling. If you're going to have GOP operatives, then you have to be upfront with people and say, these are GOP operatives. They toe the party line. Some of them ran for Congress or state legislature or city council under the Republican Party, and their views are going to be probably biased in favor of the Republican Party, even if, they might be in lockstep with average Republican voters. Now, people might question, does it really matter? Because odds are these GOP operatives are probably going to say the same thing that average Republican women voters would say anyway. Well, it kind of does matter, because he goes on to follow up the statement saying, the obvious response to this criticism is a group of average Republican women voters would have answered the same way, but this misunderstands why this particular CNN segment attracted so much attention. What was distinctive about these women, and the reason conservative media trumpeted what they said, wasn't that they thought Kavanaugh should be confirmed. Had they said something like, this is a case of he said, she said, and I don't have enough evidence either way to reject him, or in the absence of other witnesses, I'm inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt, the segment wouldn't have attracted much attention. Instead, these women first said they believed Kavanaugh without reservation, and then effectively said even if he did do it, it wasn't a big deal, and in fact was the kind of thing you'd expect a 17-year-old boy to do. What they were doing was rejecting the entire idea that sexual assault should disqualify someone from being on the Supreme Court. That's why everyone on the left and the right retweeted that interview, and they were, in effect, telling GOP senators, no matter what Ford says, we'll support you when you vote to confirm him. Those aren't things a panel of average Republican women voters from across the country would necessarily have said, but they are things that a panel of hardcore conservatives from Miami-Dade were going to say, which is why CNN's decision to assemble that panel is so weird. So there you have it. CNN will do something like this, and then Republicans are still going to claim that mainstream news has a liberal bias and that there's this anti-conservative bias. This segment is essentially propaganda at the behest of Kavanaugh and the GOP. But yet they're still going to turn around and play the victim and claim that, they're always being attacked arbitrarily by mainstream news when mainstream media is providing them with cover by having GOP operatives on to talk about Kavanaugh in a segment when they claimed that they were assessing Republican women, average Republican women specifically. It's disingenuous, and for CNN to not point this out is very irresponsible, because if you're a journalist, your goal is to inform people, and if you are purporting to inform them about the viewpoint of average Republican women, then you need to either tell your viewers who you're having on, or get actual Republican women on. I'm sure you could have found someone easily to come on and be on TV. So why they chose not to have actual average Republican women, I don't get it. But I mean, you should have at least, at a minimum, disclosed the fact that you were talking to GOP operatives and they dominated the conversation. But CNN didn't do that. I mean, this is kind of what we've come to expect from cable news, irresponsible journalism that doesn't tell you everything you need to know.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.